I was always the family afterthought, living in my perfect sister's shadow, until she took the one person who saw me clearly, my boyfriend of 3 years. Then she had the audacity to invite me to their wedding. What happened next would change everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Claire Wilson. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my sister Vanessa has been the golden child of our family. She's 2 years older than me, and according to my parents, smarter, more talented, and far more likely to succeed in life. Growing up with that kind of comparison wasn't just difficult, it was soul-crushing. "Claire, honey, why can't you be more like your sister?" my mother would ask with a disappointed sigh whenever I brought home report cards with B's instead of straight A's. Vanessa never struggled with math. It wasn't just academics. Vanessa was the star athlete who broke school records in swimming, the talented pianist who performed at regional competitions, and the natural beauty who never went through an awkward phase. I, on the other hand, was average in most subjects, clumsy on the sports field, and endured braces, acne, and a regrettable scene phase that my parents still bring up at family gatherings. "You have your own qualities," my father would say. That slight hesitation before qualities, making it clear he was struggling to identify exactly what they were. Our family photos told the story better than words could. Vanessa front and center, usually holding a trophy or certificate, our parents beaming proudly beside her. I was always positioned slightly to the side, like an afterthought in our family portrait. Sometimes I felt like I could disappear completely, and the family photo would look more balanced. I learned to live with it. What choice did I have? Throughout high school, I developed coping mechanisms, finding my own interests that Vanessa didn't care about, making friends who didn't know my sister, creating an identity that wasn't defined by comparison. It wasn't perfect, but it was survival. When college acceptance letters arrived, Vanessa's Yale admission prompted my parents to throw an extravagant party. They invited family, friends, and even neighbors to celebrate their daughter's achievement. 2 years later, when I got accepted to a state university on a partial scholarship, my father patted my shoulder and said, "Well, that's practical. Student, loans are a good lesson in financial responsibility. No party, not even a special dinner." I moved into my dorm with minimal help from my family. My father dropped me off with my belongings, helped carry the heavier boxes, and left within an hour, explaining that he had a thing to get to. That thing turned out to be a spontaneous celebration dinner for Vanessa, who had just been selected for a prestigious summer internship. I found out through my mother's social media post, complete with photos of champagne toasts and a cake with "Congratulations, superstar," written in elegant script. College became my sanctuary. For the first time, I existed in a space where no one immediately compared me to my sister. I wasn't Vanessa's younger sister or the other Wilson girl. I was just Claire, a journalism major with a passion for investigative reporting and a talent for photography that even my professors noticed. "You have a unique eye," my photography professor told me after class one day, reviewing my portfolio. "There's an emotional intelligence in how you capture people in unguarded moments. That can't be taught." It was the first time someone had identified something I was genuinely good at, possibly even better than Vanessa, who had never shown interest in photography. I clung to that compliment like a life raft in a stormy sea, using it to propel myself forward whenever self-doubt crept in. By junior year, I had secured an internship at the local newspaper, joined the university's award-winning student publication, and even won a regional contest for my photo essay on homelessness in our college town. I called my parents, excitement bubbling over as I shared the news about the award. "That's nice, sweetie," my mother said, her voice distracted. "Did you hear about Vanessa? She's been invited to present her research at an international conference in London. We're so proud. And just like that, my achievement evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. It was during this particularly low moment that I met Ethan. I was sitting in a coffee shop just off campus, trying not to cry into my latte while editing photos for an upcoming exhibition, when someone dropped into the chair across from me. "Sorry to intrude," he said with a gentle smile that immediately caught my attention. "But are you Claire Wilson? From the investigative journalism seminar?" I nodded, quickly wiping away a stray tear that had escaped despite my best efforts. "I'm Ethan Reeves," he continued, either not noticing my emotional state or kindly choosing to ignore it. "I saw your photo essay on the homeless crisis. It was extraordinary. The way you captured dignity in such desperate circumstances. I've never seen anything like it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Here was someone who had not only noticed my work but had been moved by it. Someone who saw value in what I created without any comparison to a more accomplished sibling. "Thank you," I finally managed, my voice small but sincere. "That means a lot." "I'm working on a story about corruption in student housing," Ethan explained, his dark eyes alight with passion. "I'm a decent writer, but my photography skills are abysmal. Would you consider collaborating? Your visual perspective would elevate the whole project." That conversation changed everything. Ethan and I began working together, meeting regularly to develop the housing exposé. He was studying political science with plans to become an investigative journalist, and his analytical mind complemented my more intuitive approach perfectly. We spent long evenings in the newspaper office, piecing together evidence, developing narratives, and occasionally arguing about ethical boundaries in reporting. I found myself looking forward to our meetings more than anything else in my week. Unlike everyone else in my life, Ethan seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and perspectives. He listened when I spoke, asked follow-up questions, remembered details about my life, and never once made me feel like I was somehow less than. "You have this incredible ability to see things other people miss," he told me one night as we reviewed my photos of dilapidated student apartments. "You notice patterns, connections. It's like you have this whole different way of processing the world." 3 months into our collaboration, our exposé on student housing exploitation was published in the university paper and picked up by several local news outlets. The story prompted an official investigation into the property management company we'd identified, eventually leading to significant reforms in off-campus housing regulations. The night we received news of the investigation, Ethan took me to dinner to celebrate. Over pasta and wine that we were barely old enough to order legally, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. My heart sank. This was it. The moment when he would tell me he was moving on to a bigger project, or that he'd received a job offer across the country, or any number of scenarios that ended with him leaving my life. "I started this partnership because I admired your work," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the person behind the lens. Your compassion, your determination, your quiet strength. I've never met anyone like you, Claire." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. People didn't fall in love with me. I was the afterthought, the runner-up, the consolation prize. "You don't have to say anything right now," Ethan added quickly, misinterpreting my silence as rejection. "I just needed you to know how I feel." "No one has ever chosen me first," I blurted out, immediately wishing I could retract such a vulnerable admission. Ethan's expression softened. "Then everyone else has been making a terrible mistake," he said simply. "Because you're extraordinary, Claire Wilson." And just like that, I had something that was mine alone, someone who saw me, valued me, and chose me above all others. Ethan and I became inseparable. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be someone's priority, to be the person whose calls were always answered, whose opinions were valued, whose presence was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. We dated throughout our senior year, supporting each other through final projects, job applications, and graduation. When I received a job offer from a respected online news magazine in Boston, Ethan encouraged me to take it, even though his own job prospects were still uncertain. "We'll figure it out," he promised, kissing me on the forehead. "Your career matters too." Those words, "your career matters too," nearly brought me to tears. In my family, my ambitions had always been secondary, my achievements footnotes to Vanessa's headline-worthy accomplishments. With Ethan, I was the headline. 3 months after graduation, Ethan landed a position at a public radio station in Providence, just an hour from Boston. We were ecstatic. We found apartments within our respective budget constraints and settled into weekend visits and midweek video calls. It wasn't perfect, but we were making it work, building our careers, while nurturing our relationship. For almost 2 years, I lived in a bubble of happiness I'd never thought possible. My work was being recognized, my relationship was thriving, and for once, the constant ache of being second best had receded to a distant memory. I even started therapy to address the lingering effects of growing up in Vanessa's shadow, gradually learning to value myself independently of external validation. Then came Thanksgiving, and the invitation to bring Ethan home to meet my family. I was nervous. Of course, my family had a way of making me feel small without even trying, and I worried about how Ethan would perceive me after witnessing their dynamics. But I also felt a flutter of pride at the thought of introducing them to this wonderful man who had chosen me. "They're going to love you," I assured Ethan during the drive to my parents' suburban Connecticut home, trying to convince myself as much as him. "And if they don't," he replied with an easy smile, "it doesn't change how I feel about you." The first few hours went surprisingly well. My parents seemed impressed by Ethan's job in public radio and his articulate discussion of current events. My father, particularly, engaged him in lengthy conversations about political journalism and media ethics, topics he had never bothered to discuss with me despite my career in the same field. Then Vanessa arrived, fashionably late as always, breezing into the house like a gust of fresh air. She had recently completed her MBA and secured a position at a prestigious consulting firm in New York. Her hair was expensively highlighted, her outfit impeccably stylish, and her presence immediately shifted the energy of the room. "Sorry, I'm late," she announced, accepting kisses on both cheeks from our parents. "Traffic from the city was a nightmare." Then her eyes landed on Ethan, and something changed in her expression. A flicker of interest that sent a warning chill down my spine. "You must be Claire's boyfriend," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard absolutely nothing about you, which means you must be special. My sister usually overshares about everything." It was a subtle dig, the kind Vanessa excelled at, appearing friendly while implying I was socially inept. I felt Ethan tense slightly beside me before shaking her hand. "Ethan Reeves," he introduced himself. "And Claire has mentioned you quite a bit. Congratulations on your new position." Dinner was excruciating. What had started as the Ethan show, with my parents asking about his work and background, quickly transformed into the Vanessa show, as my sister dominated the conversation, with stories of her high-profile clients and glamorous Manhattan lifestyle. My parents ate it up, peppering her with questions and showering her with praise. "Vanessa just purchased a condo in Tribeca," my mother announced proudly. "At 30, imagine that." With a little help from the bank of Mom and Dad, Vanessa laughed, tossing her hair. "Just a small loan for the down payment." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I nearly choked on my wine. My parents had contributed nothing to my education beyond occasional care packages of snacks and toiletries, explaining that they were teaching me financial independence. Meanwhile, they had apparently been saving to help Vanessa buy Prime, Manhattan real estate. Claire's photography was recently featured in a national publication, Ethan interjected during a rare pause in the Vanessa monologue. Her photo essay on urban food deserts was brilliant. A brief, awkward silence followed. "Oh, she's still doing that?" my father asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "I thought that was just a college hobby." "It's her job, Dad," I said quietly. "I've been at the same magazine for almost 2 years." "Well, not everyone can work with Fortune 500 companies," Vanessa said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Some people prefer creative pursuits." The way she said creative pursuits, like it was synonymous with unemployment, made my cheeks burn. I felt Ethan's hand find mine under the table, a gentle squeeze of support that gave me strength to endure the remainder of the evening. After dinner, as I helped my mother clear the dishes, I overheard Vanessa cornering Ethan in the living room. "So, public radio," she was saying, her voice carrying that hint of condescension she reserved for things she deemed beneath her. "That must be fulfilling. Have you ever considered television? With your voice and, well, everything else, you'd be wasted behind a microphone." I couldn't hear Ethan's response, but whatever he said made Vanessa laugh, that practiced musical laugh she used when charming someone important. My stomach knotted with a familiar anxiety, the one that always appeared when Vanessa set her sights on something I valued. When we finally left my parents' house that night, Ethan was unusually quiet during the first part of our drive back to Boston. "I'm sorry about all that," I said eventually, unable to bear the silence. "My family can be a bit much." Ethan sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "They don't see you, Claire, not really." He reached for my hand. "But I do. And I love what I see." His words soothed the raw edges of the evening, and by the time we reached my apartment, I had convinced myself that the uncomfortable dinner was just another chapter in my lifelong experience as Vanessa's sister. Unpleasant, but survivable. I had no idea that it was actually the beginning of the end. Over the next few months, I noticed subtle changes in Ethan. He was less available for our weekend visits, often citing work projects that kept him in Providence. Our video calls grew shorter, with Ethan seeming distracted and eager to end the conversations. When we did see each other, something felt off, a distance I couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked during a rare weekend visit, after Ethan had spent most of the evening checking his phone. "You seem elsewhere." "Just work stress," he assured me, putting his phone face down on the coffee table. "This new series on healthcare, inequality, is consuming all my mental energy." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But doubt had planted its seed, and my mind began cataloging every canceled plan, every abbreviated call, every moment of emotional distance. Then came the text message that confirmed my worst fears, sent to me by mistake, clearly intended for someone else. "Can't wait for tonight. Told C I'm working late again. Same place at 8? I stared at my phone, the blood draining from my face. C could only be me. And same place implied this wasn't the first meeting. When confronted, Ethan crumbled immediately, his face a mask of guilt and shame. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "It just did." "Who is she?" I asked, though in my heart I already knew the answer. "Vanessa," he whispered, confirming my deepest fear. "We ran into each other in New York when I was there for a conference. She said she wanted to catch up, hear about my work. It was just coffee at first, then dinner, and then—" I couldn't breathe. Of all the people in the world, Ethan had chosen my sister, the person who had everything I'd ever wanted handed to her on a silver platter. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just that he had cheated, but that he had reinforced the narrative that had defined my entire life. Whatever I had, Vanessa could take if she wanted it. How long? I managed to ask through the tightness in my throat. 3 months, Ethan admitted. Claire, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. 3 months, nearly a quarter of our relationship had been a lie. All those weekends he was working. He had been with her. All those abbreviated calls, he had been rushing to speak with her. The distance I'd felt. It was him already moving away from me and toward her. Get out, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. Get out now. He left without argument, and I collapsed onto the floor, sobs tearing from my body with such force that I thought I might break apart. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on my chest, a knife twisting in my gut, a fire burning through my veins. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was confirmation of my deepest insecurity. I was always, inevitably, second best. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief, rage, and numbing despair. I took time off work, unable to focus on anything beyond the most basic functions of survival. I alternated between crying until I was empty and staring blankly at walls, replaying every moment with Ethan and searching for signs I should have seen. My phone remained silent. No calls from Ethan begging forgiveness, no calls from Vanessa, attempting explanation or, God forbid, seeking my blessing, no calls from my parents who surely must have known what had happened. The silence was its own kind of cruelty, confirmation that no one considered my feelings worth addressing. After 3 weeks of self-imposed isolation, my best friend, Zoe, practically broke down my door. Enough, she announced, surveying my unwashed hair and the fortress of takeout containers surrounding my couch. You're coming with me. She dragged me to a boxing gym, handed me gloves, and pointed me toward a punching bag. Hit it, she instructed. Hit it like it's your problems. I stood there, feeling ridiculous and exposed, until Zoe demonstrated, her small frame delivering a surprisingly powerful jab to the heavy bag. Your turn, she said, and with every punch, say something you need to let go of. Hesitantly, I threw a weak punch. Ethan, I whispered. Louder, Zoe demanded. And harder. I hit the bag again with more force. Ethan! Again! Another punch, stronger this time. Vanessa! With each strike, I called out the names of people who had hurt me, expectations that had crushed me, and beliefs that had limited me. By the time I finished, I was drenched in sweat, my arms aching and my voice hoarse. But something had shifted. A tiny flame of anger had begun to replace the hollow ache of sadness, and anger, at least, made me feel alive. Zoe made me promise to return to the gym 3 times a week. Endorphins, she explained, nature's antidepressant. Slowly, painfully, I began reassembling the pieces of my life. I returned to work, where my editor compassionately assigned me stories that wouldn't require too much emotional bandwidth. I maintained my boxing schedule, gradually adding other exercise classes that left me too exhausted to dwell on my pain. I started therapy again, this time focusing specifically on my sister-related trauma and patterns of seeking validation from others. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it, my therapist reminded me during a particularly difficult session. Not your parents, not Ethan, not your sister. Your worth is inherent. I was just beginning to believe those words when the invitation arrived. A thick cream envelope with gold embossing, addressed to me in Vanessa's perfect handwriting. Together with their families, Vanessa Marie Wilson and Ethan James Reeves request the honor of your presence at their marriage celebration. I stared at the invitation, my hands shaking so violently that the heavy cardstock rattled. They were getting married. My sister and my ex-boyfriend of 3 years, the man I had planned a future with, the first person who had ever chosen me first, were getting married. And they had the audacity, the cruelty, to invite me to witness it. Attached to the formal invitation was a handwritten note from Vanessa. Claire, I know this is unexpected, but Ethan and I truly want you there. What happened between us was unfortunate, but we can't fight fate. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants. I hope you can find it in yourself to be happy for us. After all, we're family, and family supports each other through everything. Love, V. The note was so perfectly Vanessa, self-serving disguised as magnanimous, placing her desires above everyone else's feelings, framing her betrayal as some romantic inevitability beyond her control. And that signature, V, as though we were still close enough for nicknames. I sank to the floor, the invitation clutched in my fist, and felt something inside me finally snap. Not break, snap. Like a twig breaking free from a branch in a storm, I felt myself detaching from the need for their approval, their love, their validation. In that moment of white-hot clarity, I realized a fundamental truth. I didn't have to accept the roles they assigned me. I didn't have to be the supportive sister, the gracious ex-girlfriend, the family doormat who smiled through pain for the sake of keeping peace. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be truly, righteously angry, not just at Ethan and Vanessa for their betrayal, but at my parents for their lifelong favoritism, and at myself for accepting it all as normal for so long. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the crumpled invitation, then texted it to Zoe with a single question. What would you do? Her response came seconds later. Burn it. Block them. Move to Bali. I laughed through my tears, feeling a surge of gratitude for friends who saw my pain clearly without trying to minimize it or rush me through it. Seriously, though, Zoe added, whatever you decide, I'll support you. But know this, you don't owe them your presence or your forgiveness. I spent the next week turning over my options, consulting both my therapist and my most trusted friends. I could decline politely. I could ignore the invitation completely. I could send a scathing response telling them exactly what I thought of their fate. I could show up and make a scene, like in the movies. Or I could do something entirely unexpected, something that would reclaim my power and rewrite the narrative they had created about me. As I considered what that might be, I received another blow. My mother called, ostensibly to check if I'd received the invitation, but really to pressure me into attending. Vanessa is really hoping you'll be there, she said, her tone making it clear that Vanessa's hopes outweighed my feelings, as always. It would mean so much to her to have her sister's support. Did it mean much to her when she started seeing Ethan behind my back? I asked, surprising myself with the direct confrontation. My mother sighed that familiar sigh, the one that communicated her disappointment in my failure to accommodate Vanessa's happiness. Claire, these things happen. Ethan and Vanessa have a special connection. Sometimes people just belong together. And what about my special connection with him? The 3 years we spent building a relationship. Honey, my mother said, in that patronizing tone I'd grown to detest, be reasonable. You must have known someone like Ethan would eventually want something more. The implication hung in the air between us. More than me. Someone better than me. Someone like Vanessa. I have to go, I said abruptly, ending the call before she could continue. I sat in silence afterward, my mother's words echoing in my head. Someone like Ethan would eventually want something more. What exactly made Ethan so special that I should have expected to lose him? And what made me so obviously inadequate that I should have anticipated his betrayal? Looking back over our relationship, I began to see Ethan in a new light. Yes, he had valued me when others didn't, but was that really such an extraordinary quality? Wasn't that the bare minimum of what anyone deserves in a relationship? Had I been so starved for validation that I'd elevated basic respect to the level of exceptional virtue? As these questions tumbled through my mind, something unexpected began to happen. The pedestal I had placed Ethan on started to crumble. The perfect image I had constructed of him, the one man who truly saw me, was revealed as fundamentally flawed. Because a man who truly valued me wouldn't have betrayed me. A man who genuinely respected me wouldn't have chosen my sister, knowing the particular pain that choice would inflict. And Vanessa, had she ever considered my feelings for even a moment? Had it ever occurred to her to step back, to respect the boundaries of my relationship, to find someone, anyone, other than the one man who had made me feel worthy? The answer was clear. Neither of them had considered me at all. I had been an afterthought in my own relationship, just as I had been an afterthought in my family. But this time, I refused to accept that role. With sudden clarity, I knew exactly what I was going to do about the wedding invitation. I reached for my phone and composed a text to my sister. "I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world." The moment I sent that text to Vanessa, something shifted inside me. I'd spent my entire life reacting to situations, accepting the scraps of attention thrown my way, and making myself smaller to accommodate others' expectations. But now, for the first time, I was taking control of my narrative. I was making a choice that wasn't about pleasing anyone else. It was about reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. Vanessa's response was immediate and predictable. A string of excited emojis followed by, "OMG, I'm so glad. I was worried you might still be upset. This means so much to me, Claire. We're going to make it the most beautiful day." The "we" stung, but not as much as I expected. I closed the message without responding further. I had 3 months until the wedding. 3 months to transform myself from the inside out. This wasn't about looking better than the bride or making Ethan regret his choice. This was about becoming the woman I was always meant to be, the one who had been buried under years of comparison and self-doubt. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day creating what I privately called my Phoenix Plan, a comprehensive strategy for rising from the ashes of my old self. I divided it into 3 main categories: professional growth, personal development, and physical well-being. Each category had specific, measurable goals and a timeline for achievement. Under professional growth, I listed my most ambitious career aspirations: pitching a major investigative series to my editor, applying for the prestigious Burnham Fellowship that I'd always believed was out of my reach, and finally launching the photography portfolio website I'd been procrastinating on for years. For personal development, I included therapy twice a week, reading 1 self-improvement book weekly, practicing daily meditation, and cutting contact with anyone who didn't contribute positively to my life, a category that now included most of my immediate family. The physical well-being section included continuing my boxing training, adding strength training and yoga, revamping my wardrobe with pieces that made me feel confident rather than invisible, and treating myself to the professional hairstyling I'd always denied myself because it seemed frivolous compared to Vanessa's regular salon visits. This wasn't about superficial changes. It was about finally treating myself with the care and respect I deserved. It was about becoming so completely fulfilled in my own life that seeing Ethan and Vanessa together would generate nothing more than mild indifference. With my plan carefully detailed, I called my boss, Catherine, and requested a meeting. Catherine had always seen potential in me that others missed, giving me chances to prove myself when more senior reporters passed on challenging stories. "I've been holding back," I told her straightforwardly when we met in her office. "I've been operating at maybe 60% of my capacity because I never believed I deserved more. I'm ready to change that." Catherine leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What did you have in mind?" I presented my proposal for an investigative series on pharmaceutical price gouging, complete with potential sources I'd already cultivated and a unique angle focusing on patient impact rather than policy minutiae. It was ambitious, requiring travel and significant resources, but it had the potential to generate national attention. This would be a 6-month commitment at minimum, I explained, and I know Meredith has seniority. Meredith plays it safe, Catherine interrupted, studying the proposal I'd handed her. This is bold, risky, even. What's changed, Claire? Why now? I considered deflecting with a professional-sounding answer about career advancement, but decided on honesty instead. I've spent my life believing I was only worth second place. I've accepted less than I deserve in every area of my life. I'm done with that now. Catherine nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. About damn time. Let's start with a 3-part series and see where it takes us. I'll get you a travel budget approved by next week. That night, I emailed my application for the Burnham Fellowship, a program that selected just 5 journalists annually for intensive mentorship and international reporting opportunities. It was highly competitive, typically going to reporters with decades more experience than me, but I refused to let that deter me. My portfolio was strong, my recommendation letters glowing, and most importantly, my belief in myself was finally beginning to solidify. The next day, I called the therapist I'd worked with briefly after the breakup and scheduled twice-weekly sessions. Dr. Mara specialized in family trauma and self-worth issues, and she didn't hide her approval when I explained my Phoenix Plan. What you're experiencing is a powerful form of post-traumatic growth, she explained during our first session back together. Sometimes it takes a significant rupture in our expected life path to catalyze meaningful change. The key is channeling that energy constructively rather than destructively. Is it destructive to want to show up at the wedding looking absolutely incredible and completely unbothered? I asked with a small smile. Dr. Mara's eyes twinkled. Wanting to look your best and demonstrate emotional growth isn't destructive? Wanting to set the venue on fire might be. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. No arson planned, just resurrection. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into my Phoenix Plan with single-minded determination. My investigative series kicked off with interviews across 3 states, documenting heart-wrenching stories of patients forced to choose between medication and food. The first article generated immediate attention with several national outlets, picking it up and requesting interviews. Meanwhile, I maintained my rigorous physical regimen. Boxing 3 times weekly became my emotional outlet, allowing me to physically expel the anger and hurt that still occasionally surfaced. I added strength training with a personal trainer named Marco, who seemed genuinely puzzled when I apologized for not being able to lift as much as his other clients. Why are you comparing yourself to people who have been training for years? He asked bluntly during our 3rd session. The only person you need to outperform is yourself from last week. His words struck me with unexpected force. How much of my life had I wasted comparing myself to Vanessa, to colleagues, to arbitrary standards I hadn't set for myself? From that session forward, I started tracking my own progress without reference to anyone else's achievements. Each small improvement became a personal victory worth celebrating. The physical changes were becoming noticeable, defined muscles emerging where softness had been, improved posture from the core strength exercises, increased energy from better sleep and nutrition. But the internal changes were even more profound. I found myself speaking up more confidently in editorial meetings, setting boundaries with demanding sources, and most surprisingly, feeling less anxious about potential failure. Failure isn't the opposite of success, Dr. Mara reminded me during a particularly important session. It's part of success. Each failed attempt teaches you something crucial about what works and what doesn't. This perspective shift allowed me to take risks I'd previously avoided. I pitched an ambitious photo essay to a prestigious arts magazine, something I would never have dared before, and while they rejected it, the editor provided thoughtful feedback and encouraged me to submit future work. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, I revised the portfolio based on her suggestions and submitted it to 3 other publications. 1 month into my transformation, Vanessa called. I had been successfully avoiding family gatherings and deflecting her text messages with brief, non-committal responses, but now she was on the phone, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Claire, I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I'm having my first dress fitting next weekend, and I really want you there. Mom's coming, and Aunt Patricia, and my bridesmaids, of course. It would mean so much to have your opinion." The old Claire would have agreed immediately, desperate for inclusion in this family event despite the pain it would cause. The new Claire recognized the request for what it was. Not genuine desire for my presence, but Vanessa's need to believe she hadn't done anything truly unforgivable. "I'm afraid I can't make it," I replied calmly. "I'll be in Chicago interviewing." Sources for my investigative series. "Oh." The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "Your work thing. That's important, I guess, but this is my wedding dress, Claire. Can't you reschedule your interviews?" "No, Vanessa, I can't. These people have arranged time off work and childcare to speak with me. Their stories matter. More than your only sister's wedding dress fitting?" The familiar note of entitled disbelief had entered her voice. "Yes," I said simply. "More than that." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. Vanessa had never heard me prioritize my needs above hers so directly. "Well, I suppose I'll send you pictures then," she finally said, her tone suggesting she was granting an enormous favor. "That's not necessary," I replied. "I'm sure whatever you choose will be beautiful. I'll see the dress at the wedding." After we hung up, I waited for the familiar guilt to surface, the nagging feeling that I'd somehow failed as a sister by not accommodating Vanessa's wishes. To my surprise, it never came. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had honored my commitments and respected my own boundaries. That was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. 2 weeks later, I received an email that nearly stopped my heart. "Congratulations on your selection as a 2023 Burnham Fellow." I read the message 3 times before the reality sank in. I, Claire Wilson, perpetual runner-up, professional afterthought, had been selected for one of the most prestigious fellowships in journalism. I screamed so loudly that my neighbor knocked on my door to check if I was all right. When I explained the news, she hugged me spontaneously and insisted we celebrate. That evening, I found myself at a local wine bar with an impromptu gathering of colleagues and friends, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about which international stories I hope to pursue. "I'm thinking of focusing on women rebuilding their lives after domestic violence," I explained to Elena, a fellow photographer who had always been supportive of my work. There are grassroots organizations doing incredible work in this space across cultures, but their stories rarely get told with the depth they deserve. "That's perfect for you," Elena nodded enthusiastically. "You have this amazing ability to capture resilience without exploitation. Your subjects always maintain their dignity in your work." As the celebration continued around me, I checked my phone and saw a text from Catherine. "Knew you had this in you all along. Can't wait to see where you go from here. So proud." That simple message brought tears to my eyes. Pride, not from my parents, not from Vanessa, not from Ethan, but from someone who valued me for my work and character, not for how I compared to someone else. It felt revolutionary. The news of my fellowship spread quickly through professional circles, and eventually, inevitably, reached my family. My father called the next day, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of respect. "Your mother mentioned something about you winning a fellowship," he said after brief pleasantries. "Burnham, was it? That sounds impressive." "It is," I confirmed, refusing to downplay the achievement. Only 5 journalists are selected each year. It includes international reporting opportunities and mentorship from some of the best in the field. Well, that's excellent, Claire. Really excellent. We're very proud. The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear now seemed strangely hollow. Not because I didn't believe him. I think he was genuinely proud. But because I no longer needed his pride to validate my accomplishment. I already knew its worth. Thank you, I said simply. I worked very hard for this. After a moment of awkward silence, he cleared his throat. Your mother and I were wondering if you'd like to come for dinner this weekend. It's been a while since we've seen you, and with the wedding coming up. I'm afraid I can't, I replied, the ease of refusal still surprising me. I'm preparing for a trip to Seattle for the fellowship orientation, but please give Mom my love. 2 months after I'd sent that fateful text to Vanessa, I had a clear measure of how far I'd come. My byline was appearing regularly on front-page stories. My photography portfolio website had launched to positive feedback from peers and potential clients. My body was stronger and more capable than it had ever been. Most importantly, my mind had developed resilience I never thought possible. Dr. Mara noted the change during our sessions. You're speaking differently about yourself, she observed. Have you noticed that? I hadn't, consciously, but when she pointed it out, the shift was obvious. I no longer prefaced statements with self-deprecating qualifiers. I didn't minimize my achievements or attribute my successes to luck. I had stopped apologizing for taking up space in rooms where I belonged. With 1 month left until the wedding, Vanessa's communications became more frequent and increasingly desperate. There were bridesmaids' dress fittings I missed, bridal shower planning I declined to participate in, and family dinners I couldn't attend due to work commitments. Each refusal seemed to genuinely baffle her, as though she couldn't comprehend that I had a life that didn't revolve around her major life events. Are you still coming to the wedding? She finally asked during a particularly tense phone call. Because if you're planning to make some kind of scene, I'd rather you just didn't come at all. I RSVP'd yes, I reminded her calmly. I'll be there. But you've skipped literally everything else. The dress fitting, the shower, the menu, tasting. Those were optional events that conflicted with my professional obligations, I explained. The wedding is different. I promised I'd be there, and I will. There was a long pause before Vanessa spoke again, her voice uncharacteristically small. Claire, are we okay? Because it feels like we're not okay. For the first time in our adult lives, Vanessa seemed genuinely concerned about the state of our relationship. Not because it affected her wedding aesthetics, but because she actually cared about my feelings. It was such a novel experience that it took me a moment to formulate a response. No, Vanessa, we're not okay, I finally said, my voice gentle but firm. You began a relationship with the man I loved, behind my back, while he and I were still together. You prioritized your desires over my feelings, as you've done our entire lives. That's not something I can just get over because you want me to. But you're coming to the wedding, she said, confusion evident in her voice. I thought that meant you'd forgiven us. I'm coming to the wedding because I made a choice to be there. Not for you, not for Ethan, but for me. My attendance isn't about forgiveness. It's about showing myself that I can face difficult situations with dignity and strength. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken realizations. For perhaps the first time, Vanessa was seeing me as a separate person with valid feelings and boundaries, not just as an extension of her needs and wants. I never thought about how it would affect you, she admitted quietly. I fell in love with him, and it seemed like the most important thing in the world. My feelings always seemed more urgent, more real somehow. I know, I said, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. That's been our dynamic since childhood, But I can't participate in that pattern anymore, Vanessa. It's not healthy for either of us. After we hung up, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. That conversation represented something I'd never experienced with my sister before. Honesty without animosity, boundaries without apology. Whether it would lead to genuine change in our relationship remained to be seen, but I had spoken my truth, and that alone was revolutionary. As the wedding approached, I continued my transformation with unwavering focus. My final dress fitting confirmed what the mirror had been telling me. The physical changes were dramatic. The navy blue silk gown I'd chosen accentuated lean muscles and confident posture that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. But the woman reflected in the mirror had transformed in ways far more significant than the physical. Her eyes held steady. Self-assurance, her smile genuine rather than practiced. 2 days before the wedding, I received the most unexpected call of all, from Ethan. Seeing his name on my caller ID sent a jolt through my system, but not the devastating pain I'd feared. Instead, I felt a curious detachment, as though receiving a call from someone I'd known in another lifetime. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Claire," he said, his voice achingly familiar yet somehow foreign. "Thank you for picking up. I wasn't sure you would." "What do you need, Ethan?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I just wanted to check if you're really coming to the wedding. Vanessa said you are, but I thought, given everything." He trailed off awkwardly. "I'll be there," I confirmed. "I RSVP'd months ago." "Right, of course." He paused, clearly struggling with whatever he really wanted to say. "Claire, I need to tell you something. I've never properly apologized for how I hurt you. What I did was unforgivable, betraying your trust with your own sister. There's no excuse for it." The apology I'd once desperately wanted now felt strangely unnecessary. "Why are you telling me this now, Ethan? 2 days before your wedding?" He exhaled sharply. "Because I keep seeing your name everywhere. Your investigation series, The Burnham. Fellowship announcement, that photo essay in The Atlantic. You're doing exactly what you always said you wanted to do, and you're excelling at it. It made me realize how little I actually supported your ambitions when we were together." The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had chosen Vanessa, believing she was the exceptional sister, only to watch me step into my power once freed from the constraints of being the lesser Wilson daughter. "Thank you for the apology," I said after a moment. "I wish you and Vanessa happiness in your marriage." "Are you happy, Claire?" he asked suddenly, the question catching me off guard. "Truly. Happy?" I considered deflecting but opted for honesty instead. "I'm fulfilled in ways I never imagined possible. I'm pursuing work that matters to me. I'm surrounded by people who value me for exactly who I am. And most importantly, I've finally learned to value myself. So yes, Ethan, I'm genuinely happy." There was a weighted silence before he spoke again. "I'm glad. You deserve that. You always did." After we hung up, I sat quietly, assessing my emotional state. There was no devastation, no renewed heartbreak, not even anger anymore. Just a calm acknowledgement that some relationships serve their purpose in our lives and then end, making room for growth that might never have happened otherwise. The night. Before the wedding, I performed a small personal ritual. I gathered photos of Ethan and me, screenshots of old text messages I'd saved, and the small gifts he'd given me throughout our relationship. I hadn't been able to dispose of these items after our breakup, keeping them hidden in a box under my bed like emotional contraband. One by one, I looked at each item, acknowledged the feelings it evoked, and then placed it in a paper bag. When everything had been reviewed and stored, I took the bag to the building's trash chute and let it go, watching it disappear into the darkness below. It wasn't dramatic or cathartic, just a quiet, deliberate release of attachments that no longer served me. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, without anxiety about the day ahead. Whatever happened at the wedding, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was prepared to face it with grace and authenticity. The woman who would walk into that church tomorrow was not the same one who had received a wedding invitation 6 months earlier. She was stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, finally comfortable in her own skin. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something profound. The wedding that had once represented my ultimate humiliation had transformed into an opportunity to demonstrate my most significant victory, not over Vanessa or Ethan, but over the limiting beliefs that had confined me for a lifetime. Tomorrow wasn't about them at all. It was about me, stepping fully into the light of my own making. The morning of Vanessa and Ethan's wedding dawned with perfect weather, clear blue skies and gentle sunshine that photographers dream about. I awoke before my alarm, feeling surprisingly calm. Today would test everything I had built within myself over the past 3 months. It wasn't just about appearing composed, it was about genuinely being at peace with how my life had unfolded. I took my time getting ready, treating the process as a form of mindfulness. The hot shower, the careful application of makeup that enhanced rather than masked my features, the styling of my hair into an elegant updo that framed my face. Each step was deliberate and unhurried. I slipped into my navy silk gown, noting how differently it draped over my stronger, more defined body. The woman in the mirror looked polished, confident, and completely at ease. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. War paint on? Armor secured? Remember, you're not just surviving today, you're thriving. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. Fully equipped and surprisingly calm. We'll call you tonight with all the details. As I gathered my essentials, phone, small clutch, the wedding gift I had carefully selected, I paused to center myself with the meditation practice I'd developed over recent months. 3 deep breaths, eyes closed, focusing on a single affirmation. I am complete within myself. The ceremony was being held at St. Bartholomew's Church, an elegant stone building where our parents had married 35 years earlier. The reception would follow at the Westfield Estate, one of the most exclusive venues in Connecticut. Vanessa had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, and our parents had spared no expense to make that dream reality. I arrived at the church exactly 20 minutes before the ceremony, early enough to find good seating, late enough to minimize awkward socializing. As I walked up the stone steps, I noticed several heads turn in my direction. Most were distant relatives or family friends, who hadn't seen me since before my transformation began. Their double takes and whispered comments might have once filled me with anxiety. Now they barely registered. Inside the church vestibule, my mother spotted me immediately. She hurried over, already dressed in her mother-of-the-bride finery, an expensive pale blue ensemble that had undoubtedly required multiple shopping trips and alterations. "Claire, thank goodness you're here. Vanessa was worried you might not come after all." Her eyes widened as she took in my appearance. "You look different." "Thank you," I replied simply, accepting her observation without elaboration. "Well, come say hello to your sister before the ceremony. She's in the bridal suite." My mother took my elbow, attempting to guide me as though I were still a child requiring direction. I gently but firmly removed my arm from her grasp. "I'll find my seat first. There will be plenty of time to speak with Vanessa at the reception." My mother's expression flickered between confusion and disapproval. This wasn't the compliant daughter she was accustomed to managing. "Claire, she's asked for you specifically. Don't make this difficult." In the past, those words would have immediately activated my need to please, to smooth over any potential conflict. Now they simply informed my response. "I'm not making anything difficult, Mom. I'm establishing a boundary that works for me. I'll speak with Vanessa later." Before she could protest further, I moved past her into the main sanctuary. The church was already filling with elegantly dressed guests, admiring the elaborate floral arrangements that cascaded from the ends of each pew. I selected a seat near the middle on the bride's side, close enough to see clearly, far enough to maintain emotional distance. My father appeared beside me minutes later, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire. "Your mother says you refused to see Vanessa before the ceremony." "I chose to find my seat instead," I corrected gently. "How are you, Dad?" The simple redirection seemed to throw him. "Fine, fine. Busy day, of course. Everything has to be perfect for your sister." "I'm sure it will be," I agreed, noting how quickly the conversation had turned to Vanessa as it always did. He studied me with uncharacteristic attention. "You look well, Claire. That fellowship is treating you good, I suppose." "The fellowship hasn't begun yet, but thank you. I am well." An awkward silence fell between us, filled with unasked questions and unspoken observations. My father seemed to be seeing me clearly, for perhaps the first time in years, and the experience visibly unsettled him. "Well, I should." He gestured vaguely toward the front of the church. "Of course. I'll see you at the reception." As he walked away, I noticed his slightly stooped shoulders and the new gray at his temples. For the first time, I saw my father not as the intimidating figure who had always compared me unfavorably to Vanessa, but as a man who had made choices, based on limited understanding, choices that had shaped all our lives in ways he perhaps never fully comprehended. The church filled rapidly as the ceremony time approached. I recognized faces from childhood, from college, from the periphery of my relationship with Ethan. Some nodded politely in my direction, clearly unsure how to interact with the ex-girlfriend of the groom who also happened to be the sister of the bride. Others avoided eye contact entirely, pretending complete absorption in the wedding program. The organ music shifted, signaling the imminent start of the ceremony. A side door opened, and Ethan entered with the officiant and his groomsmen. He looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair neatly styled, his posture betraying just a hint of nervousness. Our eyes met briefly across the church, and I offered a small, genuine smile, not out of residual affection, but from the surprising realization that I truly wished him well. The person I had become no longer needed him to suffer for his choices. The music swelled, and the bridal procession began. 3 bridesmaids in pale pink gowns walked slowly down the aisle, followed by our young cousin as flower girl. Then the traditional bridal march began, and everyone rose to their feet as Vanessa appeared on our father's arm. She was, undeniably, a beautiful bride. Her gown was classic elegance, ivory satin with delicate lace overlay, a cathedral-length veil catching the light as she moved. Her face glowed with happiness, her smile radiant as she focused entirely on Ethan waiting at the altar. As they passed my pew, neither Vanessa nor my father glanced in my direction. Their attention was completely forward-focused, as though magnetized toward the future they were walking toward. There was something poetically appropriate about that lack of acknowledgement. They had always moved through life with selective vision, seeing only what aligned with their preferred narrative. The ceremony proceeded with traditional precision, the eyes giving away, the vows, the rings, the pronouncement. I watched it all with a sense of detached appreciation, like viewing a well-executed play. The emotions that swirled through the church, joy, sentimentality, romance, touched me lightly but didn't penetrate. I had processed my grief thoroughly in the months leading to this day. There was no fresh wound to be reopened by witnessing their union. When the officiant invited the congregation to stand for the presentation of the newlyweds, I rose with everyone else, applauding politely as Ethan and Vanessa practically floated back down the aisle, their faces alight with celebration. They looked genuinely happy, and I found myself hoping, somewhat to my surprise, that their marriage would succeed. Not for their sake, but because failed relationships rarely taught the lessons they should. Outside the church, guests gathered for the formal departure of the bridal couple to the reception venue. I remained slightly apart from the main crowd, observing rather than participating. Several people approached me with awkward condolences thinly disguised as conversation. "Such a beautiful ceremony, wasn't it? You're so brave to come," said my mother's friend Margaret, patting my arm with practiced sympathy. "The flowers were lovely," I agreed, ignoring the second comment entirely. "Claire!" A familiar voice called from behind me. I turned to find Elena, my photography colleague, approaching with a warm smile. I had invited her as my +1, knowing I would appreciate having a genuine friend amidst the family politics. "You survived," she said, linking her arm through mine. "And you look absolutely stunning. Half the room couldn't take their eyes off you." I laughed softly. "I doubt that very much, but thank you for coming. Ready for part 2? "Absolutely. Though I'm still not entirely convinced you shouldn't have gone with my original suggestion of showing up with a renowned heart surgeon as your date." "Too obvious," I replied as we walked toward my car. "Besides, this day isn't about making anyone jealous. It's about me finishing a chapter on my own terms." The drive to the Westfield estate gave us time to decompress before the reception. Elena kept the conversation light, skillfully avoiding the emotional landmines that surrounded the day's events. By the time we arrived at the venue, a sprawling mansion with manicured gardens and a grand ballroom, I felt refreshed and centered. The cocktail hour was already underway on the mansion's terrace when we arrived. Guests mingled beneath string lights, sipping champagne and sampling past hors d'oeuvres while a string quartet played softly in the background. Elena and I found space at a high-top table near the garden edge, a perfect vantage point for observing the crowd. "Claire Wilson? Is that really you?" I turned to find James Peterson, an old friend from college who had known both Ethan and me during our early relationship. He stared at me with undisguised astonishment. "The very same," I confirmed with a smile. "How are you, James? This is my friend Elena." James continued to stare as he shook Elena's hand. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look incredible. Different, but incredible." "Life changes us all," I replied lightly. "Are you here with someone?" "My wife couldn't make it. Deadline for a major project. She's an architect," he explained, finally finding his conversational footing. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here given the circumstances." "Why wouldn't I support my sister on her wedding day?" I asked with deliberate innocence. James looked momentarily flustered. "Well, because of, the history with—" "Ancient history," I assured him, my tone gentle but firm. "We've all moved forward." Our conversation shifted to safer topics. His work, Elena's recent photography, exhibition, mutual acquaintances from university days. Throughout, I noticed James studying me with puzzled interest, clearly trying to reconcile the confident woman before him with the perpetually overshadowed girl he remembered. As cocktail hour wound down, guests were directed to the ballroom for the reception. Elena and I found our assigned table near the back of the room, a placement that might once have felt like a deliberate slight, but now seemed like a fortunate opportunity for objective observation. The bridal party's entrance was a choreographed celebration, with each pair of bridesmaids and groomsmen dancing into the ballroom to upbeat music before Vanessa and Ethan made their grand appearance to thunderous applause. They moved immediately into their first dance, a practiced waltz that showcased Vanessa's ballroom lessons and Ethan's natural coordination. "They look happy," Elena observed quietly. "They do," I agreed, finding no pain in the acknowledgement. "I hope they are." The evening progressed through the familiar wedding sequence: dinner, speeches, cake cutting, bouquet toss. I participated where appropriate, applauded when expected, and maintained genuine conversation with our table mates. Several people who had known me throughout my relationship with Ethan approached our table, curiosity evident in their expressions. Each seemed prepared for awkwardness or drama, each left slightly confused by my poised warmth. During the father-daughter dance, I watched my dad hold Vanessa with unmistakable pride as they moved across the floor. His face shone with the special light he had always reserved for his eldest daughter. Once, that exclusive devotion had been a source of deep pain for me. Now, I saw it as a limitation in him rather than a deficiency in me. As the dance floor opened to all guests, Elena nudged me. "Don't look now, but your mother is heading this way with determination in her step." I turned to see my mother approaching, her expression a familiar mix of criticism and expectation. She pulled out an empty chair at our table without invitation. "Claire, you haven't congratulated your sister yet," she admonished quietly. "People are noticing." "I wasn't aware I was being monitored," I replied calmly. "But you're right. I should speak with Vanessa. Thank you for the reminder." I stood before she could continue, smoothing my dress with practiced grace. "Elena, would you excuse me for a moment?" I made my way across the ballroom, weaving between dancing couples and conversing guests. Vanessa was at the head table, momentarily alone as Ethan spoke with his parents nearby. When she saw me approaching, her expression flickered between surprise and wariness. "Claire," she said, rising to greet me. "You came." "I said I would," I reminded her, accepting her automatic embrace with gentle reciprocation. "Congratulations, Vanessa. The ceremony was beautiful." She pulled back to study my face, searching for signs of insincerity or hidden anger. Finding none, her features relaxed slightly. "Thank you. I wasn't sure if you'd actually go through with attending." "I keep my promises," I said simply. An awkward silence fell between us, filled with unspoken history and unresolved tensions. Vanessa fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit reminiscent of childhood. "You look amazing," she finally said. "I almost didn't recognize you when I saw you in the church. Not just the outside stuff, though that dress is stunning, but something else. You seem different." "I am different," I acknowledged. "Life has a way of transforming us if we let it." She nodded slowly. "Are you okay with all of this?" She gestured vaguely around the reception. The question was complicated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer was too multifaceted for casual wedding conversation. Was I okay with their marriage? Yes, in the sense that I no longer felt devastated by it. Was I okay with how they had conducted themselves? No, and I probably never would be. Was I okay with who I had become through the process of overcoming that betrayal? Absolutely. "I'm at peace with my life," I told her truthfully. "And I wish you happiness in yours." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly at my response. She had clearly expected either continued anger or false forgiveness, the binary options that had defined our relationship in the past. My nuanced truth seemed to disarm her. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I never really thought about how you'd feel." "That sounds even worse, doesn't it?" "It sounds honest," I replied. "We can't change the past, Vanessa. We can only learn from it and make different choices moving forward." She studied me with new attention, as though seeing aspects of me that had previously been invisible to her. "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped looking for validation from people who couldn't give." I answered with gentle directness. Before she could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his expression cautious as he registered who she was speaking with. "Claire," he said, his voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to both of us." "Congratulations." "Ethan," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I was just telling Vanessa how beautiful the ceremony was." An unspoken current passed between us. Acknowledgement of our history, recognition of the present moment. acceptance of the path forward. There was no animosity in the exchange, just the bitter sweetness of a chapter truly closing. "Would you like to dance?" Ethan asked suddenly, the question clearly surprising Vanessa as much as it did me. For old time's sake? In the past, I might have interpreted this invitation as an attempt at reconciliation or a test of my emotional durability. Now, I recognized it for what it was, Ethan's way of seeking closure, of confirming that the damage he had caused hadn't been irreparable. "I think I'll pass," I said kindly. "But thank you for the offer. If you'll excuse me, my friend is waiting." As I turned to leave, Vanessa caught my hand. "Claire, wait. Thank you. For being here. For being gracious. I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it more than you know." The genuine emotion in her voice touched something within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a softening of the hardened edges where our relationship had fractured. "Take care of each other," I said simply, gently disengaging my hand from hers. I walked back across the ballroom, feeling lighter with each step. The conversation hadn't provided the dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation that movies might script for such moments. Instead, it had offered something far more valuable: authentic closure. Elena watched my approach with curious attention. "How did that go?" she asked as I rejoined her at our table. "Surprisingly well," I replied. "I think I'm ready to leave. Now." "Before the cake?" she asked with mock horror. "I've had enough sweetness for one day," I said with a small smile. "Besides, I have an early flight tomorrow." My Burnham Fellowship orientation in Seattle was scheduled to begin Monday morning, a new adventure that represented everything I had been working toward. Leaving the wedding early to prepare for that journey felt perfectly symbolic. We made our way discreetly toward the exit, pausing only briefly to thank the wedding coordinator for arranging our table. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sounds of celebration faded behind us, replaced by peaceful night sounds, distant crickets, gentle breeze through ancient oak trees, our footsteps on the gravel path. "So," Elena said as we walked to the parking area, "what exactly was coming that they had no idea about?" I laughed softly at her reference to the dramatic thoughts I'd had when first receiving the wedding invitation. Not what I originally imagined, that's for sure. No scenes, no revenge, no dramatic confrontations. "Just you," Elena observed, "completely transformed and genuinely at peace. Honestly, that's far more powerful than any revenge could have been." As we reached my car, I paused to look back at the brightly lit mansion, music and laughter spilling from its windows. Inside, Vanessa and Ethan were celebrating the beginning of their life together, surrounded by family and friends who had witnessed their commitment. And I was standing outside, not because I had been excluded, but because I had chosen a different path, one that aligned with my authentic self rather than others' expectations. The realization brought a smile to my face. "Ready?" Elena asked, catching my expression. "More than ready," I confirmed, turning away from the celebration and toward my future. The drive home was peaceful, the night sky clear and star-filled above us. Elena and I chatted easily about her upcoming exhibition and my fellowship plans, the wedding already receding into memory rather than dominating our conversation. When I arrived at my apartment after dropping Elena off, I kicked off my heels and changed into comfortable clothes. The fancy dress hung in my closet, not to be hidden away as a reminder of a difficult day, but simply as a beautiful garment I might wear again for some future celebration. I moved to my living room window, gazing out at the city lights. My suitcase stood packed by the door, ready for tomorrow's early departure to Seattle. On my desk lay the notebook containing my fellowship project outline, a series on women rebuilding their lives after trauma, finding strength they never knew they possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Mission accomplished? How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully, checking in with myself on multiple levels. The answer came with surprising clarity. Complete. I'm feeling complete. Because that was the truth. The journey that had begun with heartbreak and betrayal had transformed into something entirely unexpected, a pathway to genuine self-discovery and empowerment. What had initially seemed like the ultimate humiliation had become the catalyst for my most significant growth. I had gone to the wedding not to make a statement to others, but to prove something to myself, that I could face the people who had hurt me most deeply and remain whole, centered, and true to myself. The completion of that challenge wasn't marked by dramatic confrontation or public vindication, but by the quiet certainty that I no longer needed either. As I prepared for bed, I realized that the most significant gift of this difficult journey had been freedom, from comparison, from external validation, from patterns that had limited me for a lifetime. Vanessa would always be my sister, and our relationship would likely always be complicated. Ethan would always be part of my history, a chapter in my life story. But neither of them defined me anymore. I was defined by my work, my values, my choices, and most importantly, by the relationship I had developed with myself, one built on respect, understanding, and genuine appreciation for my unique strengths and perspectives. Tomorrow, I would board a plane to Seattle, beginning a fellowship that represented everything I had worked toward professionally. But the more significant journey had already occurred internally, the transformation from a woman who measured her worth through others' eyes to one who recognized her inherent value regardless of external validation. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected on the question that had driven me forward these past months. What was coming that they had no idea about? The answer was simply me, the authentic, empowered version of myself that had been waiting along for the opportunity to emerge. Not a revenge plot or a dramatic scene, but something far more powerful. A woman who had finally stepped fully into her own light. As the plane touched down in Seattle, I felt a sense of anticipation entirely different from the nervous energy that had accompanied me to the wedding. This was excitement in its purest form, the thrill of stepping into a future I had created through my own determination and hard work. The Seattle skyline greeted me through the airplane window, the iconic Space Needle piercing a sky painted in shades of morning gold and blue. Rain had cleared overnight, leaving everything looking washed clean and full of possibility. It seemed like the perfect metaphor for my own life, storms weathered, clarity emerging. The Burnham Fellowship had arranged accommodations for all, 5 fellows in a renovated building near Pike Place Market. My apartment, though small, featured floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light and offered glimpses of Elliott Bay in the distance. I spent my first afternoon arranging my belongings, transforming the neutral space into something that reflected my evolving aesthetic. Minimal, but warm. Practical, but with touches of beauty in carefully chosen details. That evening, all 5 fellows met for dinner with the program directors at an upscale restaurant overlooking the water. I was the youngest of the group by nearly a decade. My colleagues included a veteran war correspondent from South Africa, an environmental journalist from Brazil, a political reporter from Lebanon, and an investigative journalist from Chicago, who had broken several major corruption stories. In the past, I would have been intimidated into near silence by such accomplished company. Now, I approached the dinner with genuine curiosity about their experiences and confidence in what I could contribute to our collective work. Claire Wilson, the program director, Michael Burnham himself, said as he studied my portfolio during introductions, "Your photo essay on urban food deserts was remarkable. The humanity you captured while documenting systemic failure, that's exactly the kind of nuanced storytelling this fellowship was created to support." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment without deflection or qualification. I'm particularly interested in exploring how communities develop resilience within broken systems. That's precisely what we'll be discussing in tomorrow's orientation. Michael nodded approvingly. I'm looking forward to seeing how your perspective shapes our group discussions. Throughout dinner, I found myself engaged in substantive conversations about journalistic ethics, the challenges of documenting vulnerable populations, and the evolving landscape of digital media. I offered insights from my own experiences and asked thoughtful questions about theirs. Not once did I feel the need to apologize for taking up space in the conversation or justify my presence at the table. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in my new apartment, I received a text from my mother. Just checking that you arrived safely in Seattle. The wedding was lovely. Your sister missed saying goodbye to you. The message was so characteristically my mother, a gesture of concern immediately followed by subtle criticism. 6 months ago, I would have immediately apologized for leaving early, though I had stayed through most of the reception, and explained my early flight. Now, I simply responded with, "Arrived safely. Apartment is perfect. Fellowship orientation begins tomorrow." No apologies, no explanations, no seeking approval. Just information, clearly communicated. It felt remarkably freeing. The orientation week passed in a blur of intensive workshops, planning sessions, and team-building activities. The fellowship provided resources I had never imagined having access to: research assistance, equipment budgets, mentorship from industry leaders, and a network of contacts spanning the globe. Each fellow was expected to develop a major project that would unfold over the course of the year, with regular publication of findings and a comprehensive final piece. My project proposal, focusing on women rebuilding their lives after various forms of trauma, evolved significantly during that week. Through conversations with mentors and colleagues, it expanded to include an international component, examining cultural differences and resilient strategies across 3 countries. The scope was ambitious, but the fellowship directors expressed complete confidence in my ability to execute it. Your perspective on recovery and resilience brings something unique to the program. My assigned mentor, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Diana Martinez, told me during our first one-on-one session. Most trauma coverage focuses on the damage. You're asking how people rebuild. That's both refreshing and necessary. I think we underestimate how much strength exists in supposed vulnerability, I explained. My own experience has taught me that transformation often begins at our lowest points. Diana nodded thoughtfully. Personal experience can be powerful motivation for journalistic exploration, as long as we maintain objective standards in our reporting. Have you considered how your own journey might inform this work without overtaking it? The question was insightful and challenging, exactly the kind of guidance I had hoped for from this program. I spent the next several days developing a methodological framework that would allow my personal insights to enhance rather than bias my reporting, creating interview protocols that would elicit authentic stories while respecting subjects' boundaries. 3 weeks into the fellowship, I conducted my first formal interview for the project with a woman named Sophia, who had rebuilt her life after losing her home, business, and community standing due to her husband's financial crimes. Her story of resilience was remarkable, not for dramatic victories, but for the quiet dignity with which she had reclaimed her identity piece by piece. The hardest part wasn't losing everything, Sophia told me as we sat in her modest apartment, my camera capturing the determination in her eyes. It was realizing that I had defined myself through external markers for so long that I didn't know who I was without them. Her words resonated deeply with my own experience. How did you begin to redefine yourself? I asked. By asking questions I had never allowed myself to consider before, she replied. What matters to me? Not to my family, not to society, but to me? What am I genuinely good at? What do I want my life to represent? It was terrifying at first, that blank canvas, but eventually it became liberating. As I reviewed the interview footage that evening, I was struck by the parallels between Sophia's journey and my own, despite our vastly different circumstances. We had both experienced the disorientation of losing external definitions, the struggle to identify authentic values, and ultimately the freedom of self-determined identity. These common threads would become central to my project as it developed over the coming months. 6 weeks into my Seattle residency, my phone rang with an unexpected caller ID. Vanessa. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. I had received a formal thank you card for my gift, a set of first edition books by authors they both admired, but no personal communication. I hesitated briefly before answering, centering myself in the knowledge that this conversation, whatever its nature, couldn't shake my newfound stability. Claire, Vanessa's voice sounded different, more subdued than her usual confident tone. How are you? How's Seattle? I'm well, I replied. The fellowship is challenging and fulfilling. Seattle is beautiful, even with the rain. How was the honeymoon? Tahiti was gorgeous, she said, though without the effusive enthusiasm I would have expected. But that's not why I'm calling. I waited, allowing the silence to create space for whatever she needed to say. I've been thinking about our conversation at the wedding, she continued after a moment, about what you said regarding making different choices moving forward. I can't stop thinking about it, actually. This was unexpected. Vanessa rarely reflected on past interactions, generally preferring to move forward as though difficult conversations had never occurred. I've started therapy, she announced suddenly. 2 weeks ago. I told Mom I was joining a new yoga studio because I knew she wouldn't understand. The admission stunned me into momentary silence. In our family, therapy had always been viewed with suspicion, a sign of weakness rather than self-awareness. For Vanessa, who had built her identity on appearing effortlessly perfect, acknowledging the need for professional support represented a significant shift. That's great, Vanessa, I finally managed. Therapy has been incredibly valuable for me. I know, she said softly. That's partly why I decided to try it. I saw how much you've changed. Not just the external stuff, but something deeper. You seem so centered now. I want that too. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of trying to emulate Vanessa, she was now looking to me as a model for personal growth. My therapist asked me to identify patterns in my relationships, she continued. And it was so obvious once I started looking. I've always taken what I wanted without consideration for others, especially you. I've always needed to be the center of attention, the favorite, the special one. I remained silent, allowing her this important articulation without interruption. I don't expect forgiveness, she added quickly. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on understanding why I've made the choices I have. And I'm sorry, Claire. Truly sorry for the pain I've caused you, not just with Ethan, but throughout our lives. The apology I had once desperately craved now arrived when I no longer needed it for my own healing. Yet I recognized its importance for Vanessa's growth and, potentially, for the future of our relationship. Thank you for telling me, I said simply. Self-awareness is a challenging but worthwhile journey. Could we talk sometimes? She asked hesitantly. Not like before, where I dominated the conversation and made everything about me. But maybe we could start building something different? I'd like to actually know you, Claire, the real you that I never took the time to see. The request was tempting but complicated. I had worked hard to establish healthy boundaries, and maintaining them would be essential to any new dynamic with my sister. I'd be open to occasional calls, I said carefully, with the understanding that we're both still figuring out what a healthy relationship between us might look like. I'd like that, Vanessa replied, her voice carrying genuine relief. After we hung up, I sat for a long while at my window, watching ferries cross the sound as I processed the conversation. Vanessa's reaching out represented something I hadn't anticipated, the possibility that my own transformation might catalyze change in others. It was both a responsibility and an opportunity, requiring careful navigation of old patterns while remaining open to new possibilities. As my fellowship project progressed, I traveled extensively, documenting women's resilient stories in communities across the United States before expanding to international settings. My first overseas assignment took me to a small coastal town in Portugal, where a community of women had rebuilt their lives after a devastating factory closure decimated the local economy. Maria, one of the community leaders, had transformed her home into a cooperative workshop where women created artisanal products sold through global fair trade networks. As we walked through the sun-dappled workspace, she explained her philosophy with quiet certainty. When the factory closed, the men wanted to leave immediately for the cities, she told me, as I photographed her weathered hands expertly weaving intricate patterns. But the women, we looked at what remained: our homes, our skills, our relationships with each other. We built from there, stone by stone. Her approach resonated deeply with the themes emerging across my interviews: the tendency of women to find value in what remained rather than focusing solely on what was lost, to build community rather than isolating in hardship, to create meaning through connection rather than achievement alone. I spent 3 weeks documenting their story, living in Maria's guest room and participating in daily cooperative activities. My photography captured not just their economic recovery, but the intangible elements of their resilience: the laughter shared over communal meals, the gentle corrections offered to those learning new skills, the fierce pride in creating something beautiful from difficult circumstances. The resulting photo essay, published through the Fellowship's media partners, generated significant attention. National Geographic requested an expanded version, and several major news outlets interviewed me about the project's findings. Recognition was gratifying, but the most meaningful response came from the women themselves when I sent them the published piece. "You have seen us," Maria wrote in careful English. "Not just our work or our struggle, but our hearts. This is rare and precious gift." Her words crystallized something essential about the project and my evolving approach to journalism: the profound importance of truly seeing people in their wholeness rather than defining them primarily through their hardships. This insight would guide my work through subsequent international assignments in Colombia and Thailand, creating a coherent thread through diverse cultural contexts. 8 months into the fellowship, I received an unexpected email from Catherine, my former editor. "Claire, your international work is exceptional. We'd love to have you back when your fellowship ends, with a significant promotion to senior correspondent and the freedom to continue your current project under our banner. The position would include substantial travel budget and complete creative control. Let me know if you're interested in discussing further." The offer was everything I would have desperately wanted a year earlier: recognition, advancement, creative freedom, and the security of returning to a publication that valued my work. Yet, rather than immediately accepting, I found myself considering other possibilities that would have previously seemed unimaginable. Did I want to return to the same city, the same circles, the same professional context, albeit with enhanced status? Or was I ready to create something entirely new, building on connections and insights from my fellowship experience? The fact that I could genuinely consider both options, without fear or artificial limitations, represented profound growth in itself. I decided to defer the decision until the fellowship's conclusion, allowing myself to remain fully present for the remaining international assignments while exploring various possible futures. This deliberate approach to major life decisions, thoughtful, patient, and aligned with my authentic values, had become characteristic of my new way of moving through the world. As my final international assignment in Thailand concluded, I found myself with an unexpected 2-day layover in New York before returning to Seattle. Rather than booking a hotel, I made an impulsive decision to reach out to Vanessa, who had maintained our monthly phone conversations with surprising consistency and growing depth. "I'd love to have you stay with us," she responded to my text. Almost immediately. "Ethan's on a work trip until Thursday, so we'd have the place to ourselves." The absence of Ethan simplified matters considerably. While our brief interaction at the wedding had provided necessary closure, I wasn't eager to navigate the complex dynamics of an overnight stay in their shared home with him present. His absence created space for continuing the careful reconstruction of my relationship with my sister without additional complications. Vanessa's Tribeca apartment reflected her tasteful aesthetic: high ceilings, minimalist furniture, carefully curated art. But I noticed subtle changes from what I would have expected. Personal photographs mixed with the designer pieces. Books, stacked on side tables, a general lived-in quality that softened the showroom perfection she had always maintained. "Welcome to our home," she said somewhat nervously as she showed me to the guest room. "I made dinner reservations at this little place around the corner, but we could order in if you prefer." "The restaurant sounds perfect," I assured her, noting her uncharacteristic deference to my preferences. "I'd love to shower first if that's okay." Later, over dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, our conversation moved beyond the careful small talk of our phone calls into more meaningful territory. The past 10 months had created enough distance for perspective while maintaining enough connection for relevance. "How is married life?" I asked, finding I could now ask the question with genuine curiosity rather than pain. Vanessa twirled pasta thoughtfully before responding. "It's educational. Marriage holds up a mirror in ways I wasn't prepared for. All my patterns, all my selfishness, they're harder to ignore when someone's witnessing your daily life." "That sounds challenging," I observed. "It is, but necessary." She set down her fork and met my eyes directly. "Therapy has helped me recognize how much of my behavior has been driven by insecurity. I've always needed to be the best, to have the most attention, to win at everything, even when the competition only existed in my mind." The self-awareness in her assessment was striking. "What do you think created that insecurity?" I asked. "I've been thinking about that a lot," she replied, her voice quieter. I think I always felt I had to justify being the favorite. Mom and Dad put me on this pedestal from such a young age, and I was terrified of disappointing them, of being discovered as ordinary." Her perspective startled me. While I had spent years feeling inadequate compared to Vanessa, she had been trapped in her own way, bound by impossible expectations of perfection that had warped her relationships and sense of self. "That sounds exhausting," I said with genuine empathy. "It was. It still is sometimes." She took a sip of wine. "But I'm learning to recognize when I'm falling into old patterns. With Ethan, with colleagues, with you." "And with our parents?" I asked, curious about how her evolving self-awareness had affected that foundational relationship. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. "That's complicated. They don't understand why I'm dwelling on the past, as Mom puts it. They're still operating under the assumption that our childhood was idyllic and their parenting perfect." I nodded, familiar with our parents' resistance to any narrative that challenged their self-image as ideal parents. "I've had to establish some boundaries," Vanessa continued, surprising me further. "Limiting visits, changing the subject when they start comparing me to friends' children, or collecting my accomplishments like trophies. It's been difficult." The role reversal was remarkable. Vanessa creating distance from our parents while I was developing a more balanced perspective on their limitations. We had each moved toward a middle ground from opposite starting points. "How about you?" Vanessa asked, redirecting the conversation. "The fellowship looks amazing from what I've seen published. Is it everything you hoped for?" "More," I replied. Honestly. It's challenged me in ways I needed, connected me with incredible mentors, and given me resources to pursue stories that matter deeply to me. "Your work is extraordinary, Claire," she said with unmistakable sincerity. "The way you capture people's dignity even in difficult circumstances. It's powerful." Coming from Vanessa, who had rarely acknowledged my professional accomplishments in the past, the compliment carried special weight. I accepted it with a simple, "Thank you," neither dismissing the praise nor requiring more elaboration. The evening continued with genuine conversation about our evolving lives, careers, and perspectives. There were still awkward moments, still conversational patterns we had to consciously redirect, but underneath it all was something new: mutual respect and authentic interest in each other as complex individuals rather than as competitors or roles in a family drama. When we returned to her apartment, Vanessa hesitated in the living room before retrieving a small wrapped package from a drawer. "I've been waiting for the right time to give you this," she explained, handing me the gift. "It's not your birthday, or anything, but, well, you'll see." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. Tucked into the first page was a handwritten note. "Claire, to record your journey as it continues to unfold with admiration for your strength, gratitude for your example, and hope for our future as sisters. Love, Vanessa." The gesture was thoughtful and personal in a way Vanessa's gifts had never been before, chosen with consideration for my preferences rather than her taste, acknowledging my path rather than hers, expressing genuine sentiment rather than obligation. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." "I wanted you to know that I see you now," she explained softly. "The real you, not the version I created in my mind to justify my behavior." That night, lying in Vanessa's guest room, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. What had begun as devastating betrayal had catalyzed growth beyond anything I could have imagined. Professional achievement, personal development, and even the possibility of an authentic relationship with my sister built on mutual respect rather than competition or resentment. The betrayal hadn't been necessary for this growth. Trauma is never a prerequisite for transformation. But having experienced both the breakdown and the rebuilding, I recognized that the person I had become was shaped by the entirety of my journey, including its most painful chapters. In the morning, Vanessa and I shared coffee and conversation before she left for work, and I departed for the airport. Our goodbye was warm, but appropriately restrained, neither artificially effusive nor coldly distant. We were finding our way toward an authentic sibling relationship, acknowledging the complicated history between us while remaining open to a different future. As my plane took off from JFK, returning me to Seattle for the final weeks of my fellowship, I opened the journal Vanessa had given me and began to write. Not about the past or its injuries, but about the future I was creating, the projects I hoped to develop, the stories I felt called to tell, the woman I was continuing to become through conscious choice and consistent action. The journal entries flowed from a place of hard-won self-knowledge. I am not defined by others' betrayals or limitations. I am defined by my response to life's challenges, by the values I uphold even when tested, by the vision I pursue even when the path isn't clear. I am not the second choice or the afterthought. I am the protagonist of my own story, complex, capable, and constantly evolving. I am not diminished by others' success or happiness. I am engaged in my own unique journey, measuring progress against my authentic goals rather than external comparisons. I am not bound by past patterns or others' expectations. I am free to create a life aligned with my deepest values, to pursue work that matters, to cultivate relationships that nourish rather than deplete. I am not defined by a single relationship or role. I am a multifaceted woman, a journalist with a unique perspective, a friend with genuine loyalty, a sister with evolving boundaries, a human being with inherent worth. These weren't merely affirmations but lived truths, demonstrated repeatedly through the choices I had made over the past year. The woman who had once felt devastated by betrayal had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself than she had ever imagined possible. As the fellowship neared its conclusion, I made my decision about Catherine's job offer. While deeply appreciative of the opportunity, I chose a different path, establishing myself as an independent journalist with a network of media partnerships that would allow me to maintain creative control while pursuing stories across multiple platforms. It was a less secure option, but one that aligned perfectly with my evolved understanding of what I valued most: authenticity, creative freedom, and work that made meaningful contributions to public understanding of complex human experiences. The decision represented the culmination of my transformation, from someone who sought safety and validation to someone willing to take calculated risks in service of deeper purpose. My final presentation for the Burnham Fellowship brought together all elements of my year-long project: photography, narrative reporting, and analysis of resilience patterns across diverse contexts. The audience included not only fellowship participants and mentors, but representatives from major media organizations, nonprofit leaders, and potential future collaborators. As I shared images and stories of women rebuilding their lives after profound disruption, I recognized that I was simultaneously telling my own story through different faces and circumstances. The universal elements of transformation, disorientation, grief, experimentation, rebuilding, and eventually transcendence, appeared across cultural contexts, binding diverse experiences into a coherent human narrative. What connects these women's stories isn't just their experience of disruption, I explained during the presentation's conclusion, but their refusal to be defined by it. Each found a way to incorporate loss into a larger narrative while creating meaning that transcends their individual trauma. They remind us that transformation isn't about erasing difficult chapters, but about integrating them into a more complex, authentic whole. The presentation received a standing ovation, followed by numerous conversations with organizations interested in expanding the project into different contexts or formats. Diana Martinez, my fellowship mentor, embraced me warmly afterward. "You've created something exceptional here," she said with evident pride. "Not just professionally impressive, but genuinely important. These stories matter, and you've told them with the dignity and complexity they deserve." "Thank you for your guidance," I replied sincerely. "I couldn't have developed this without your mentorship." Diana smiled knowingly. "I provided some technical advice and professional connections, but this vision, this perspective on resilience and dignity, that came from you, Claire. From your lived experience and hard-won wisdom." Her words acknowledged what I had gradually come to recognize throughout the fellowship year, that my personal journey had enhanced rather than compromised my professional work, providing insights that allowed me to see and capture aspects of human experience that might otherwise remain invisible. That evening, at the fellowship's closing reception, Michael Burnham himself approached me with an unexpected offer: a substantial grant to continue my project in additional countries, with complete creative independence and the fellowship's institutional support. "Your work exemplifies everything this program was created to nurture," he explained. "Journalism that illuminates the complexity of human experience while maintaining the highest ethical and technical standards. We'd be honored to support your continued exploration of this theme." The opportunity represented everything I could have hoped for professionally: resources to pursue meaningful work, recognition of my unique contribution, and the freedom to follow my journalistic instincts without institutional constraints. As I accepted Michael's offer with genuine gratitude, I couldn't help reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. A year earlier, I had been devastated by betrayal, questioning my worth and drowning in comparison to others. Now I stood confidently in my own accomplishments, recognized for work that represented my authentic voice and values. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without effort. It had required consistent choice, disciplined practice, and courageous self-examination. It had demanded that I challenge limiting beliefs, establish healthy boundaries, and develop new patterns of thinking and behaving. It had necessitated both letting go of old identities and consciously creating new ones aligned with my deepest values. But the result, the woman I had become through this process of intentional growth, was someone I genuinely admired. Not perfect or complete or immune to future challenges, but authentic, resilient, and increasingly clear about her purpose and worth. Later that night, back in my apartment, I received a text from Zoe. Saw the live stream of your presentation. Mind blown. You're literally changing the narrative about trauma and resilience. So incredibly proud to call you my friend. Her support, consistent throughout my journey, reminded me of another crucial aspect of transformation: the importance of witnesses who believe in your potential, even when you struggle to see it yourself. Zoe had been that witness for me, as Elena had, as Diana had become, and as I was learning to be for myself. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, lights glittering against the dark water of the Sound, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the entire journey, including its most painful chapters. The invitation to Vanessa and Ethan's wedding, which had once seemed like the ultimate humiliation, had instead become the catalyst for my most significant growth. They truly had no idea what was coming, not a dramatic confrontation or carefully orchestrated revenge, but something far more powerful. My complete transformation into a woman who recognized her inherent worth, pursued her authentic purpose, and refused to be defined by others' limitations or betrayals. That transformation, from afterthought to protagonist, from seeking validation to creating value, from comparison to self-definition, was the most profound form of victory I could have achieved, not over them, but for myself. As I prepared for sleep, I opened Vanessa's journal one more time, adding a final entry for the day. The greatest revelation of this journey hasn't been discovering what I'm capable of accomplishing, but recognizing who I've always been beneath the layers of doubt and comparison. The strength, clarity, and purpose I've found weren't created through this process. They were uncovered, like treasures long buried, but finally brought into the light. Perhaps that's the most powerful transformation of all, not becoming someone new, but finally becoming fully yourself. The Burnham grant opened doors I hadn't dared imagine just 1 year earlier. With a substantial budget, institutional backing, and complete creative control, I expanded my resilience project to 3 additional countries: Kenya, India, and Argentina. Each location offered unique cultural contexts for exploring how women rebuild their lives after profound disruption, creating a more comprehensive global perspective on resilience. My first international assignment under the new grant took me to Nairobi, Kenya, where I connected with a women's cooperative that had transformed from a small support group for widows into a thriving microfinance organization. Their leader, Amara, had lost her husband to political violence 12 years earlier and found herself suddenly responsible for 5 children with no formal education or employment history. We began with just 10 women meeting under a tree. Amara explained as we toured their current headquarters, a modest but well-equipped office space in a developing business district. All of us had lost husbands, some to disease, others to violence. All of us were told our lives were effectively over. We walked through rooms where women received computer training, financial literacy education, and entrepreneurship mentoring. In each space, former program participants now served as instructors, creating a self-sustaining cycle of knowledge, transfer, and empowerment. The Western perspective often frames African widows as permanently damaged victims, Amara noted with quiet dignity. But we have always known that crisis contains possibility. Our traditional communities recognized this before colonization interrupted our cultural wisdom. Her observation challenged my thinking. highlighting how resilience narratives themselves could be culturally determined. Where Western frameworks often emphasized individual grit and personal reinvention, Amara's organization embodied collective recovery and shared resources. Their approach wasn't just adapting to hardship, but fundamentally reimagining community structures to prevent future vulnerability. As I documented their work through interviews and photography over 3 weeks, I found myself examining my own cultural assumptions about recovery. My personal transformation had followed a largely individualistic path: therapy, career advancement, physical training, all focused on building my independent strength and capabilities. What might I have gained from more community-centered healing? What wisdom had I missed by conceptualizing resilience primarily as personal rather than collective? These questions surfaced repeatedly as I immersed myself in the cooperative's daily operations. I observed how women supported each other through setbacks, celebrated collective wins rather than individual achievements, and prioritized sustainable community development over personal advancement. Their resilience strategy wasn't about bouncing back to independence, but about weaving stronger social fabric that could hold everyone securely. Individualism is a luxury of privilege, Amara told me during our final interview. When systems fail completely, as they did for us, we discover that our relationships are our most valuable resource. The Western woman may have insurance policies and government support. We have each other. Her perspective wasn't offered as criticism, but as wisdom from hard-won experience. It expanded my understanding of resilience to include dimensions I had previously overlooked: the strength found in interdependence, the healing power of contribution to others' well-being, and the importance of transforming systems rather than merely adapting to them. The resulting feature, published simultaneously through several international media partners, generated significant attention from development organizations and policy institutes. Amara's story challenged prevailing narratives about helpless populations in developing nations, showcasing instead the innovative solutions emerging from communities typically framed as recipients rather than creators of knowledge. After Kenya, I traveled to Mumbai, India, to document the stories of women who had survived acid attacks, one of the most devastatingly personal forms of gender-based violence, intended not just to harm, but to permanently mark and isolate victims. The Radiance Collective, founded by survivors, had developed a revolutionary approach that combined medical advocacy, psychological support, and economic empowerment. Prisha, the organization's founder, had survived an attack by her former boyfriend 9 years earlier after refusing his marriage proposal. The acid had severely damaged her face, neck, and right arm, requiring 27 surgeries over 5 years. She greeted me at their workshop, a bright, airy space where survivors created handcrafted jewelry and textiles sold through international fair trade networks. Most people see only our scars and assume our stories end with victimhood, Prisha explained as she guided me through the facility. But for us, the attack was the middle of our story, not the conclusion. The workshop walls displayed stunning portraits of members, professional photographs that highlighted their dignity, strength, and individuality without either hiding or exploiting their scars. These images directly challenged both the intention of their attackers to render them invisible and society's tendency to define them exclusively by their trauma. In Indian society, a woman's face is considered her most valuable asset, Prisha noted as we observed members working at various craft stations. When that is deliberately destroyed, the message is clear: you now have no value. Our work begins by rejecting that premise entirely. Their approach was multifaceted and systemic. They fought for legislative changes to increase penalties for attackers and improve survivors' access to medical care. They provided comprehensive psychological support, addressing both trauma recovery and the challenges of navigating a society obsessed with physical appearance. Most radically, they created economic opportunities specifically designed to showcase survivors' capabilities rather than hiding them from public view. Many organizations offer survivors jobs where they can be hidden in back rooms, Prisha explained. We deliberately create roles where they interact directly with the public, where they cannot be ignored or forgotten. This is not just about income, but about reclaiming visibility on our own terms. During my 3-week documentation, I witnessed extraordinary moments of transformation. A new member removing her veil in the workshop for the first time, survivors providing courtroom support to a woman testifying against her attacker, the celebration when a long-advocated legislative amendment finally passed. Each moment revealed a different facet of resilience, demonstrating how recovery encompasses not just healing from the past, but actively creating a more just future. My interviews with 15 collective members revealed consistent themes about their recovery journeys. All described an initial period of isolation and despair, followed by a crucial turning point when they connected with others who shared their experience. All emphasized that their greatest healing came not from focusing on their own recovery, but from helping newer survivors navigate similar challenges. And all spoke about redefining beauty and worth on their own terms, rather than accepting societal definitions. Before my attack, I measured my worth by others' approval, shared Divya, who had survived an attack by her former mother-in-law. Now I determine my own value. This is not just healing, it is freedom I never knew before. The resilience embodied by these women transcended simple recovery. They had used their trauma as a catalyst for profound personal and social transformation. Their scars, intended as marks of shame, had become symbols of extraordinary courage and agents for systemic change. They had not merely survived, they had created new definitions of beauty, worth, and purpose that challenged fundamental social assumptions. As I worked on the feature, I found myself reflecting on the nature of visible versus invisible wounds. My own trauma had been primarily emotional rather than physical, allowing me to move through the world without constant external reminders or reactions. What additional courage must it require to rebuild your life when your most painful experience is literally written on your face, inviting daily comment and reaction from strangers? Yet despite this additional challenge, these women had achieved something remarkable, a quality of presence and self-possession that transcended conventional notions of recovery. They hadn't just adapted to difficult circumstances, they had used their experience to develop extraordinary clarity about what truly matters in life. The Mumbai feature, published with portraits taken by a renowned Indian photographer who collaborated with me on the project, generated international attention. Several luxury fashion brands approached the collective about potential partnerships, and a major cosmetics company launched a foundation specifically funding medical treatments for acid attack survivors. More importantly, the women themselves reported feeling truly seen rather than exploited by the coverage, represented in their full humanity rather than reduced to their trauma. My final international assignment under the grant took me to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I documented the Madres Resilientes, a collective of women who had transformed their grief over losing children to police violence into a powerful political movement. Their work had evolved from seeking justice in individual cases to fundamentally reforming law enforcement practices nationwide. Carmen, one of the founding members, had lost her 17-year-old son Miguel to an extrajudicial police killing 8 years earlier. She welcomed me into her modest home in a working-class neighborhood, the walls covered with photographs of her son alongside newspaper clippings documenting the movement's achievements. Grief can destroy you or transform you, she explained, as she prepared mate, the traditional Argentine herbal tea. For many months, I thought it would destroy me. I could not eat, could not sleep, could barely breathe through the pain. Then I met other mothers carrying the same unbearable weight, and something shifted. The Madres had begun as an informal support group, sharing their stories and accompanying each other through court proceedings that rarely delivered justice. Gradually, they recognized the systemic patterns behind their individual tragedies: policies that incentivized aggressive policing in poor communities, lack of accountability for officers who used excessive force, and media narratives that dehumanized victims from marginalized backgrounds. We realized our pain was not just personal but political, Carmen continued, her voice strengthening. Our children died because of deliberate policy choices. This meant our grief was not just ours to bear privately, but a force that could demand different choices. Over 2 weeks, I attended their meetings, accompanied them to legislative sessions and community gatherings, and documented their innovative approach to advocacy. Rather than working through traditional political channels, they created powerful public rituals that made their children's absence visible in spaces that preferred to ignore them. They installed empty school desks in government plazas, projected their children's faces onto police headquarters at night, and held silent vigils where mothers simply stood holding their children's photographs. A quiet, undeniable testimony to lives cut short. Most remarkably, they had developed constructive partnerships with reform-minded police officials, creating dialogue in spaces traditionally defined by opposition. They contributed to training programs for new officers, participated in community oversight committees, and helped design de-escalation protocols that had measurably reduced violent incidents. Anger would have been easier, admitted Lucia, whose daughter had been killed as a bystander during a police raid. Hatred requires nothing from you except your pain. But transformation? That demands everything. Your creativity, your intelligence, your compassion, even for those within the system who are also trapped in harmful patterns. Their approach to resilience challenged the individualistic focus of many trauma recovery models. These women hadn't simply processed their grief and moved forward with private lives. They had channeled it into a collective force for systemic change. Their healing came not from putting the past behind them, but from transforming their ongoing pain into constructive action that honored their children's memories through creating a more just world. The resulting feature, published near the anniversary of a major policy reform the Madres had helped secure, highlighted a dimension of resilience rarely acknowledged in popular narratives: the capacity to transform personal tragedy into social transformation. Their story demonstrated how the most profound healing sometimes comes not from moving beyond difficult experiences, but from finding meaning through them, using even the most devastating losses as catalysts for creating more just communities. As I completed the final international component of my project, patterns emerged across these diverse contexts that deepened my understanding of resilience. The women I documented in Kenya, India, Argentina, Colombia, Thailand, Portugal, and across the United States had followed different paths shaped by their unique cultural contexts and specific challenges. Yet certain elements appeared consistently: the crucial importance of connection with others who shared similar experiences, the healing power of contributing to others' well-being, the necessity of addressing systemic issues rather than just individual recovery, and the transformation of identity that incorporated rather than erased difficult experiences. These insights significantly influenced the book I began developing based on the project, a combination of photography, personal narratives, and analysis examining resilience through a transcultural lens. Rather than presenting a universal formula for recovery, the book explored how cultural context shapes both how trauma is experienced and what healing pathways become available. It challenged the predominantly Western, individualistic frameworks that dominated resilience literature, offering instead a more nuanced understanding that honored diverse approaches to rebuilding after profound disruption. The book took shape during a 3-month writing residency in a small coastal town north of Seattle. The solitude provided necessary space for synthesizing the vast material I had gathered, while weekend visits with fellowship colleagues offered valuable feedback as the manuscript developed. Diana Martinez, my mentor from the fellowship, reviewed early chapters and connected me with a literary agent who specialized in journalistic projects with social impact. This work transcends typical categories, the agent, Sophia Reed, told me during our first meeting. It's part visual anthropology, part social commentary, and part practical wisdom. Most importantly, it centers voices rarely heard in mainstream resilience narratives. With Sophia's guidance, I developed a book proposal that emphasized both the project's intellectual contribution and its potential practical impact for organizations working with traumatized populations globally. 3 major publishers expressed interest, leading to an auction that resulted in a contract with significant advance and marketing commitment. The book's development coincided with another significant evolution in my relationship with Vanessa. Our cautious reconnection had gradually developed into a more authentic sisterhood, built on mutual respect rather than competition or obligation. Monthly calls had become weekly, each conversation venturing into more meaningful territory as we continued untangling the complex dynamics that had shaped our relationship since childhood. During one particularly significant call, Vanessa shared news that reflected her own continuing transformation. "I've decided to change career directions," she announced. "I'm leaving consulting to work for a nonprofit focused on educational equity." The decision represented a substantial salary reduction and departure from the prestigious corporate track our parents had always celebrated. It reflected priorities fundamentally different from those that had driven her previous choices. "What prompted the change?" I asked, genuinely curious about her process. "Honestly, watching your journey," she admitted. "Seeing you build a life based on meaning and purpose rather than external validation. It made me question what actually matters to me, not just what impresses others." The acknowledgement was both surprising and touching. The idea that my transformation had influenced Vanessa's choices created a sense of completion, a reversal of the lifelong pattern where I had existed in her shadow, always measured